Skadibi, my friends. Today, in an effort to be more down with the youth, we are talking about TikTok brain rot. And boy, are we cooked. Have you recently experienced brain fog, a decreased attention span, loss of sleep, feelings of sadness, or feelings of emptiness that are only helped by going on TikTok for hours at a time? If so, you may be suffering from TikTok brain rot, which is a phrase that has now entered the academic literature. Brain rot was Oxford Dictionary's word of the year for 2024. In January of 2025, Pope Francis warned of the dangers of excessive scrolling and how this can lead to brain rot. Well, in Latin. I think that brain rot has entered the zeitgeist, and I think it's time for us to decide what that means. So the time of reckoning is upon us, y'all. Let's reckon. So what is brain rot? According to Wikipedia, brain rot is the supposed negative psychological or cognitive effects caused by consuming internet content deemed to be of low quality or value. Have you ever been out in public and you've seen someone just playing music or little snippets of videos out loud to everyone around them, and they're just like 3 seconds at a time, over and over and over? To me, that's brain rot. Brain rot is associated with platforms like TikTok, which are known for their short video style of entertainment and their younger audiences. And guys, at this point, somewhere between 10 and 50% of Gen Z TikTok users will prefer to search things on the app rather than on Google. This is big. So what's the problem here? Well, let me start by painting you a picture of the current landscape of the average internet user for those of you who have been living under a rock for the last several years and who only emerged to watch my video. So thank you for that, I guess. Imagine that you are an average high school or college student. You have a decently structured day, but you still have plenty of free time to do the things that you'd like to do. However, you live with your parents and you have limited opportunities to actually go out and do things. If you do have a job, it covers the costs associated with school stuff, snacks, or clothes, but you don't really have a dedicated place to hang out with your friends. Not only that, but your sleep schedule is insane and you've genuinely considered adopting a 26-hour-long day. How do you entertain yourself? Observe. You scroll a bit, you scroll some more, you scroll some more after that, and then you keep scrolling. And this is creating a bunch of chronically online doom scrollers. So what does it mean to be chronically online? Well, according to Wikipedia, my favorite place for definitions, an extremely online, which is often capitalized, terminally online or chronically online individual is someone who is closely engaged with internet culture. People said to be extremely online often believe that online posts are very important. Events and phenomena can themselves be extremely online. While often used as a descriptive term, the phenomenon of extreme online usage has been described as both a reformation of the delivery of ideas shared through words and videos and memes and GIFs and copy pasta, and the ideas themselves. For those of you who have genuinely been living under a rock and are wondering what doom scrolling is what I did about 20 days into my rediscovering boredom journey when I re-downloaded Reddit to my phone in late January of this year due to my curiosity and fears surrounding the events taking place in America. It's defined by Wikipedia as the act of spending an excessive amount of time reading large quantities of news, particularly negative news, on the web and social media, and no, it's not good for you. The last definition that we need to talk about before we can get into it is phone snubbing or phubbing. And this is when you're in a conversation with someone and they say, and then they pick up their phone and ignore you. While doing research for this video, I realized that I am surrounded by a bunch of awesome people because it has been years since that happened to me. But it is common enough that there's literally academic research on it, and unsurprisingly, it does hurt people's feelings. So what are the scientists saying about brain rot? Is it real? And guys, some of the more alarmist stuff is actually really alarming. We're looking at potential consequences such as Alzheimer's. Yeah, we're talking dementia, we're talking mild cognitive impairment, and yes, I did delete the only social media I had left, and please don't make fun of me, it was Reddit. So let's take a step back for a second. What does the research actually look like? I mean, this is Meg Talk Science after all, so let's talk some science. The good news is research in the field of how does screen time and social media affect us has had about 15 years to really find itself. The bad news is that Musical.ly only became TikTok in 2018, so the short videos, which is what a lot of people are really worried about, haven't actually been around that long. Most of the research in this field has been done on Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, and other more local social medias. So what has this field found so far? And honestly, in around 2020, there was some noise that the whole phones are bad thing was a bit of a moral panic. So this tended to come from researchers who had done longitudinal studies, which are studies where you follow someone for a long period of time and see how their habits and mental health change. What they found, honestly, was that as social media use rose, so did depression at the population level, so overall. But then when you tried to look at individuals, this pretty much fell apart. Social media was good for some, bad for others, but it only had weak effects at the individual level. This, calling it a moral panic, can be compared to how humanity reacted to books, to Google, to TV, and then to video games. So some of the earlier psychological reasons that we thought social media was bad for you relied around things like social displacement and social compensation. Social displacement is the idea that spending more time on your phone meant spending less time with friends. Now we think that generally time on social media might replace leisure activities in general, so more time on your phone means less reading. But there is also a downward trend in face-to-face communication, so this might be true actually. There's also the idea of social compensation, which is that something is already wrong or different, as in socializing is hard for you, so you spend more time on your phone socializing to compensate for this difficulty. Even then, social media use is associated with positive outcomes for some people, especially LGBTQ+ participants who might be living somewhere conservative and need someone to connect to. And you may have noticed that early theories as to how social media might have been affecting you had to do with how much time you spent on social media. But since these didn't really pan out, researchers got smarter. If the question isn't simply how much, it must be how you use it. This brought us to investigating passive versus active use of social media. Does it feel different if you scroll mindlessly or if you post things and get sweet, sweet validation from your peers? And while there is some evidence that, scrolling mindlessly might be worse, it is actually harder to tease apart active versus passive than you might think. For example, is liking a post on Instagram active or passive engagement? And the studies about this are still coming out, and results are mixed as to the actual effects and whether or not they might be different. So this is an area of ongoing research that we're still watching. So is it a moral panic after all? That is what the podcast You're Wrong About tried to argue. So You're Wrong About is a podcast that it's kind of known for myth busting common things that people tend to be wrong about because they've just been launched into pop culture and we collectively remember them a bit wrong. They came out with an episode last year called Phones Are Good, actually. And guys, they got blasted for it. So they directly stated that the worry about kids being on their phones and how this might be bad for their mental health or their brain is a moral panic. And this episode was released to the utter outrage of the core audience of their podcast. It was honestly a masterclass in audience alienation and deserves its own video. And as far as I can tell, there wasn't any kind of apology or helpful acknowledgement of the backlash, but I'm not a fan of this podcast, so I didn't follow it that closely. If I'm wrong, let me know in the comments down below. But the sheer amount of backlash that this got from not only a general audience, but also pediatricians, teachers, and parents, I think this can give us some pointers that people with experience don't think that it's a moral panic at this point. While the podcast itself chose not to engage with the research, it does seem like they were picking up the vibes that were true a few years ago. However, and we're about to talk about it, the research itself has changed since then. Furthermore, a core argument of the podcast was that people need boundaries with their phone. But children are oftentimes incapable of creating boundaries due to being children. That is still a skill that they're learning. Overall, the episode was a bit of a swing and a miss, and I think that it is fair to say that this might be escalating past the point of moral panic. However, this podcast is Meg Talk Science, so what is the science behind this? So just to give you an update on the whole research situation, in 2025, a handbook of collected research on children and screens was released with writings from pretty much all the big names in social media, screen, and internet research, and how those things affect adolescents. In it, even researchers who had previously written that we might be in the midst of a moral panic recommended reducing, limiting, or putting protective measures for children's screen time. One of the chapters was literally called Social Media and Youth Mental Health, a Departure from the Status Quo. Guys, Researchers, clinicians, parents, and teachers are worried, and it's because there is a problem. But hey, if you're watching this, maybe you have something of a reduced attention span yourself, so let's take a TikTok break.
The shot that will get your attention. Actually, everything you'll see in this video, the lights, carefully placed text, even the sounds are here for one reason.
To keep you watching.
Because your attention is a new currency. And we'll do anything for it. Sharper hooks, less haircuts, faster transitions, anything to appease the algorithm gods. But in my pursuit of views and likes, I feel like I'm selling my soul. Because now every idea gets filtered through this haunting question. Will this perform? All I really wanted was to be seen. But now all I think about is the shot that will get your attention.
In 2021, the evidence that screen time might be bad for you had started to pile up. A few studies started coming out about things that are wrong with our youth and our brains, and they had really identified the effects of excessive screen time and compulsive internet use on mental health and other aspects of cognitive functioning. So this managed to link increased social media and screen time with mental health issues such as anxiety and attention issues, and they found changes in cognitive performance in people with high scores of compulsive internet use. What this means is that for the first time, we finally managed to link social media with something bad going on in the mental health sphere and in your brain. And then more and more things just kept piling on. We have study after study after study after study of negative psychological and cognitive effects caused by use of social media and short videos in our adolescents and college students. Guys, this is a problem. And to summarize the important points of the research that just piled up on the screen, because I know that y'all are all interested in that, what we've been finding is screen time itself has now been linked with anxiety, depression, and stress as of 2024. Short-form videos themselves have been linked to increased procrastination. A review of all of the effects of social media on mental health has discussed how excessive social media use has been linked to distorted memory, worsened problem-solving abilities, and a decreased attention span. Also, short-form videos themselves have been labeled as addictive with addiction-like patterns in some internet users. So here's the big question. Does TikTok actually change your brain? And early research conducted in around 2021 did manage to identify how TikTok lights up your brain in the short term. So you see increased activity in reward networks such as the ventral tegmental area. You also see increased activity in attentional and control areas such as the default mode network. These are all normal processes, so it is completely normal to direct your attention to something, and when that thing is nice, you might get a feeling of reward out of it. However, the issue with TikTok is that you're doing that over and over and over and over and over, and you're getting reward after reward after reward after reward, and that process is worrying. But guys, long-term changes in the brain have been identified, and this is bad. So there are two main studies, and of course I'll link all the studies that I talk about in the description below so you can check them out if you'd like. And they investigated differences in the brain between people with short video addiction and people without short video addiction. What this means is that it's not necessarily that TikTok changes your brain. It could just be that you were predisposed to already be interested in watching those videos and your brain was already set up like that. However, people who have been found to have short video addiction, which by the way itself is kind of a debated term. There's no formal measure of it yet. It's just so new that it's kind of hard to define, as in that's literally in progress right now. But what they found was that people with a greater propensity to short video addiction tended to see differences in their anterior cingulate cortex, their orbital frontal cortex, and dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. What this means is that there were dysfunctions in reward processing, inhibitory control, and behavioral regulation. Basically, these areas are responsible for learning from your mistakes and for executive control. And so you see changes in people with short video addiction associated with those skills. You also see those changes, those different sizes of brain area, which are correlated to short video addiction intensity. What this means, again, is that if your brain is kind of set up that way, that you could be more predisposed to those kinds of addictions. But it could also mean that, yes, the excessive TikTok use might be changing your brain. And that's freaky. And yeah, TikTok might also be rotting your attention span. So 2 more studies which investigated attention span and how this correlates with short video addiction. One just investigated attitudes, and it found that the more addicted you feel like you are to TikTok, the more you feel like you have a rotted attention span as well, is basically what that translates to. I'll link everything so you can check it out for yourself if you want to. Another one used EEG, so they investigated brain patterns to see if there was an actual difference in brain patterns associated with short video addiction. And much like the studies I was just talking about, it found that an increased propensity to mobile phone short video addiction could, again, negatively impact self-control and diminish executive control within the realm of attentional functions. Basically, the right areas are impacted to reduce your attention span. So guys, that's really not good. There's also the terrifying possibility of digital dementia. So this can refer to 2 distinct things. One is the increased vascular dementia and Alzheimer's, which are now seen in sedentary populations. Basically, if you're having so much screen time that you don't move enough, you are more likely to get some form of dementia in the future. So it's important to remain active. There's also the possibility, and part of me thinks this might just be a bit of fear-mongering, but I do have to tell y'all about it. I think that is an important part of the debate for this. So there is the possibility that excessive screen time itself is currently causing cognitive deterioration, as we've talked about, the changes in the brain that you see with short video addiction, and that this cognitive deterioration itself will eventually cause more dementia in people our age. So I'll read you the quote. Converging evidence from biopsychosocial research in humans and animals demonstrates that chronic sensory stimulation via excessive screen exposure affects brain development, increasing the risk of cognitive, emotional, and behavioral disorders in adolescents and young adults. Emerging evidence suggests that some of these effects are similar to those seen in adults with symptoms of mild cognitive impairment in the early stages of dementia, including impaired concentration, orientation, acquisition of recent memories, anterograde amnesia, recall of past memories, retrograde amnesia, social functioning, and self-care. Excessive screen time is known to alter gray matter and white volumes of the brain, increase the risk of mental disorders, and impair acquisition of memories and learning, which are known risk factors for dementia. Chronic sensory overstimulation, i.e. excessive screen time during brain development, increases the risk of accelerated neurodegeneration in adulthood, i.e. amnesia, early onset dementia. This relationship is affected by several mediating/moderating factors, e.g. IQ decline, learning impairments, and mental illness. We hypothesize that excessive screen exposure during critical periods of development in Generation Z will lead to mild cognitive impairments in early to middle adulthood, resulting in substantially increased rates of early onset dementia in later adulthood. So basically what this is saying is that the effects of social media that we're starting to see now, of increased chances of mental illness, of physical changes going on in your brain, which we have seen, could lead to our entire generation being a lot more likely to go on to develop things like dementia and Alzheimer's. That's not great, guys. What possible mechanisms are responsible for the changes that you're seeing? Besides the actual usage of social media itself, which can be linked to addiction loops and the constant sensory stimulation, which we just talked about, you also have the loss of sleep associated with excessive TikTok use. So when it's 8 p.m. and then suddenly it's 2 a.m. and you've just been watching TikTok for hours. Guys, it's normal, but it is bad for you because you do need sleep. So without sleep, this negatively affects mental health and learning and just your general brain health. There's also the increased sedentary time associated with screen time. So right now I'm sitting, if I'm on TikTok, I'm sitting, and remember, sitting is the new smoking. Your body does want you to exercise. And of course, there are health conditions where this is really hard for you, but even just getting around and walking can be really good for your heart and cardiovascular health. So yeah, the researchers are worried. And guys, I don't know, I'm worried. Okay, this was supposed to be just a little silly video about the effects of TikTok on your brain. And I don't know, I'm a little worried that it's a bit more serious than that. I think that only time will tell, and obviously we need more research to make more conclusions about whether or not TikTok is truly affecting the brain, like those studies are suggesting. But that is a little bit scary. And the thing is, it's not just researchers saying that, right? I've seen high schoolers, I've seen 20-somethings, and I've seen adults feeling like we've lost the ability to be bored, feeling like everything is rushed all the time. and feeling like scrolling just steals so much time from us. There are so many people who are switching away from social media because it feels bad for us. And I think that might be a sign that it is bad for us. So what changed? How did we go from moral panic to genuine panic? And I'd say that one of the most concerning things is that people from my generation are worried. What separates this from your average moral panic is that your average person doesn't need to go on a rock and roll break because it just gets to them. Unless you're talking about hearing damage, which is a real concern. However, the average adult with social media has probably gone on a social media break and has probably felt like it was good for their mental health. The extra problematic thing is that children aren't really known for their self-moderation skills, and they need help in moderating that social media use. And guys, I don't have all the answers to this problem. I'm just a little bit worried. I feel like companies are so good at addicting us to these stupid rectangles. And that scares me. Because when a platform doesn't charge for you to use it, you are the product and your attention is the product that those companies are selling. And this goes back to enshittification, right? So platforms and services do tend to start out great. The early days of like Uber and Airbnb are a really good example for this. They were cheaper and they were so easy to use. But unfortunately, these models aren't profitable, and eventually investors want their cut of a profit. So enshittification will start. This means tinkering and squeezing profit out of any possible source. So you'll see ads, you'll see subscriptions, you'll see reduced services, random fees, terrible customer service. And these are all hallmarks of enshittification, and that's what's happening on our social media platforms right now. And I think that's why we're just starting to feel the effects, the big psychological effects of spending our time on these apps. I think another factor that's driving us to these TikTok addictions is the loneliness epidemic and the parasocial relationship, which are a match made in hell. So people these days are lonely. That is kind of a known thing. And you can fill that social need on TikTok through the parasocial relationship that you end up forming with creators. If you see someone every single day, they'll start to feel like your friend, even though that relationship is only one way. One study did interviews with a bunch of undergraduate students to kind of ask why they had these short video addictions. And a lot of them felt like their addiction to TikTok was driven by a lack of social support. The TikTok parasocial relationship can be a driving force as to why you use TikTok. And then, of course, you're spending less time in person with people, which makes you feel even lonelier. This is bad. So what? Are we cooked? I just wanted to say that. We might be a bit pan-fried. Because all this means that there is the possibility that there are these long-term changes in the brain associated with problematic uses of smartphones and the internet, including TikTok. That's scary. And the question is, are we cooked permanently? Because as a neuroscientist, I think that I would have to say that my answer is no. So I may have called out neuroplasticity as a neuroscience buzzword before, but just as we can change our brains to get better at watching TikToks and experiencing those reward loops, we can also change our brains in kind of the reverse direction. The brain is very highly changeable, and you're continuing to develop for a good portion of your life. What this means for you is that if you wanted to, you could delete TikTok off your phone today, and eventually you would find that things would go back to normal. Your attention span or your feelings towards your attention span would eventually increase again. And then the question comes to, will you? And I understand that the answer is no, because it's no for so many people. It's entertainment. We have a loneliness epidemic. What else do you feel like you can do? We have no third spaces where you can go to, where you can hang out. And I think that's the biggest tragedy of all, is that we have been pushed towards these social media spaces and we feel like we can't get out. Personally, I have been team no apps on my phone except Reddit, which I have since deleted since about 2020. And it's been fine. I was in university for a good portion of that. So if I wanted to talk to my friend, I could just call them and then meet up with them for coffee. And I've since moved in with my husband. So again, if I want company, I can just, force him to hang out with me. I have this silly little app where you go fishing when I want to break, when I'm like writing or doing work. And I'm on some Substack email lists, so I have things to read. But generally, I think it's also okay for us to rediscover boredom. Boredom is okay. Boredom is the reason I started this silly little YouTube channel, and it's been a lot of fun making videos. It's okay to disconnect. It's okay to be a bit lame and to be off social media, I guess is my answer to that. And honestly, that might help your brain. But yeah, if we don't make some changes on a more societal level, I'm just a bit worried for all of us, honestly. So I mentioned it before in this video, but there's a handbook for children and adolescent screen use. And again, I'll link it in the description below. It's open source, so it's free to read. It has, at the end of every chapter, recommendations for policymakers. And some of those include recommendations to create regulations that put the onus on social media companies themselves, to acknowledge that children do use their platforms, and to create safe spaces for children and their poor little brains. And yeah, I do think that we are approaching a point where this is no longer an individual problem, because individuals have a really, really hard time putting up those boundaries with social media. I think that we might be approaching the point where we need a policy level solution that somehow makes the companies make these products less addictive. I don't know. People smarter than me have been thinking about this for a long time. And I know that the handbook is 700 pages long, but if you're worried, it can really put things into perspective, both good and bad. Because the thing is, social media can be a force for good in so many people's lives. Especially if you're a kid and you live in a really conservative place and you want to connect with other people like you, but people like you aren't accepted in that conservative place. It can be a really bright, shining force in your day. So those outright bans also aren't supported. And it just makes it a very complicated beast of a problem. And I don't think that a 30-minute YouTube video is going to have the solution to that issue. But I think that we do need to start accepting the possibility that we need a bigger solution than just social media breaks. Fortunately, it does seem like individuals are changing their habits, at least on an individual level. So there is kind of a rise of groups like r/NoSurf, which are against internet addictions. And there's the rise of using dumb phones in general. And I think this points to the fact that people are starting to recognize the problems surrounding excessive social media and internet use. I mean, even just keeping your surfing tied to like your computer rather than your phone, which is with you all the time, that might be a good start. I think that the rise of dumb phones is actually a really good sign, and hopefully we'll see more of that in the future. But it's tough because, I do love FaceTiming my family. I live in Germany, they live in the United States, and that's how we communicate with each other. So of course I will always be attached to technology. And of course I will always have complicated feelings about that. But I think that overall, people wanting to reduce their social media use and their scrolling and the amount that they feel addicted to platforms and stuff, it's a sign. It's a sign that the times are changing. Hopefully. So how do we move forward? And again, generally, how bad social media is highly dependent on how you use it. So if you are a marginalized person who uses it to feel secure or have a safe place to talk about things, then it can actually have really good effects on you. But the mechanics themselves are designed to keep you on it and entertained and meant to distract you from other more important things. And that's where the drawback is. I already mentioned it. I started my journey of not being on social media as much probably 4 or 5 years ago. And I think it was good for me. I don't have apps on my phone, and that is healthy. I still post every once in a while even, and I suck at replying to people. But the space, the physical space, it not being on my phone was really good for my mental health. And I focus on other offline activities. I bake, I embroider, I read mysteries, I go on walks, I do day trips. It's nice. It feels good for me. One paradigm that I've seen kind of around, which I think is a really good way to start thinking about social media, is as digital junk food. Basically, candies and snacks might be a satisfying or decent part of your whole diet, But your body and mind need much more. And digital junk food works the same way, right? You have to decide what's good for you because an excessive amount probably isn't. There is also the Goldilocks hypothesis, which is the idea that there might be a just right amount of time to spend on the internet. So yeah, there are ways to think about this it's not all or nothing. You don't have to completely quit everything. You can reduce your time on it, and maybe it can even be beneficial for you. That's the thing. It is a great way to connect with people. So I think that you just have to decide for yourself what level of usage you want to see and what's good for your future. So yeah, I think it's important to ask yourself what relationship you want to have with your phone and with social media. Obviously, I still participate on social media and I still have screen time. I had 27 tabs open while writing this part of my script. I'm not immune to the time-sucking effects of social media. But I think we should all think of our future selves with a bit more empathy and maybe ask ourselves from time to time how they would have wanted us to spend our time. Sometimes decompressing or connecting with others or developing your own sense of style is a good thing. Other times, you can feel your attention span draining faster than your phone battery. So stay curious, and I'll see you next time, unless you're on a screen break. And thank you for watching. Okay, bye. Also, how did the youth say it? Skibbity, skibbidanger, I am the rearranger?